Christine Kaufman. I am the chair of the Governor's Council on Civil Rights, the Governor's Advisory Council on Civil Rights. I wanted to welcome you to this afternoon and evening's conversation and let you know a little bit about what it's about and who the council is. The Governor's Advisory Council on Civil Rights was set soon after Governor Schweitzer was elected. And part of our mission is to honor Martin Luther King and his birthday and invite communities to celebrate and remember the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. But in addition, we are charged with being the ears of the governor in communities around civil rights issues of our time. And so we have spent about a year inviting different groups of people to come before us, talk about the issues facing Montanans from minority groups of a variety of kinds throughout the state of Montana. We believe that Martin Luther King had a broader vision than just civil rights for people of color. Certainly that was an important and visible part of his message, but that he also was concerned about a much bigger human rights movement and social justice in our communities. And so we've tried to imagine what would Dr. Martin Luther King be involved in if he were alive today and living in Montana. And we believe that the issue of young people in the juvenile justice systems with mental illness is one of those issues. And so we have selected that as our topic for a year, to hear from people in communities in at least 3 sites around Montana. This is the first in the series. There'll be another one in Billings, another one in Havre, and then we're talking about possibility of a METNet meeting statewide for others who might want to testify. We hope to gather information, bring it back to the governor in the form of some sort of report in an effort that he might consider a legislative initiative, perhaps funding in his budget for next session, to address this issue in some concrete ways that we don't know about yet, but we hope to hear about in the coming year. We did write up a statement of purpose for these meetings, and I would like to read some of the paragraphs from that. Nationwide, an estimated 20% of the young people involved in the state juvenile justice systems suffer from severe mental disorders. Montana is likely no different. And yet, until recently, many juvenile justice systems have not paid enough attention to the mental health needs of children and youth with whom they come in contact. We, as a committee, understand that youth in the general population with serious mental illness often have multiple issues that require comprehensive and coordinated services. When these youth become court-involved, it is critical that the system affirmatively connect them with appropriate mental health care. Unfortunately, juvenile justice partners typically have limited resources and expertise with these programs. Nationwide, many of these services are often overlooked or improperly denied, and in extreme case, simply not available. From this standpoint, we see these issues as civil rights issues. If we are to succeed in preventing and reducing juvenile delinquency, we must also address not only the offenses that bring certain youth to the attention of the system, but also the underlying problems they face, including mental health problems. While acknowledging the concerns of all youth in the juvenile justice system, including those with other disabilities, these hearings will focus specifically on youth exhibiting mental health needs. We are concerned that without the presence of inquiries such as this one, and the anticipated roadmap for change arising from these meetings, the prevalence of undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and untreated instances of mental illness among youthful offenders will continue to increase and ultimately lessen the sense of community throughout our state. The focus of this committee is to gather information relative to community-based experiences regarding this population. We will pay particular attention to examining several critical domains as they relate to best practices, screening and assessment, diversion, treatment, the civil rights of juvenile offenders, parents and guardians' concerns, reentry, staff competencies and trainings, and community education initiatives. So feel free to address any or all of those areas or any others that you have brought with you today. I want to introduce to you two members of the 7-member council. We had hoped a 4th member would be here, but she was unable to attend unexpectedly. Murray Pierce, to my left here, is from Missoula and is the person really who brought these concerns to the attention to the council and got us to see the importance and the significance of these concerns. He's from here in Missoula. And also Katie Stevens, also from Missoula. She's in Great Falls part-time as a student, but here for the summer. All 3 of us were appointed by Governor Schweitzer to this council. In addition, Marilyn Kramer from Billings. I'm going to need Dorothy Eck from Bozeman. June Hermanson, who is from Helena, and Jesse James Hawley from Havre area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, we've asked Bob Liston to facilitate / participate in this hearing with us. Despite the formality of the setting here, we do hope that it is an interactive kind of time, and we've asked Bob to help make sure that happens. So Bob, would you like to make a few comments before we begin?
I guess I'd start with just kind of what I said to the council members, and that is, you know, I saw that there was going to be a hearing, and then I was asked to be a facilitator, and I've never heard of a hearing being facilitated. I'm hoping that either Senator Kaufman goes back to Helena and says, all hearings at the legislature need facilitators, or I think I'll probably get a brick in the back of the head. Again, I hope to engage all of you, especially those of you that that get up to talk. I think that it's important that the council members hear and understand what it is that you said. And hopefully, I have years of experience working in the disability arena, and so hopefully I might be able to pull a few things out of you. I may ask you to expound on some things. Some issues may come up where I ask other people to react to. This certainly is not a place, I hope, where we attack each other. We just want to get information to the council so that they can get information to the governor, and we can make systemic change or see systemic change possibly occur. As with any hearing, you have to have some rules, and luckily I don't know anybody here, so you don't know how much I hate rules. But we would like folks to keep their comments to no more than 5 minutes. At least the first go around, if at all possible. If you get on a roll, I may give you a waiver, but if we can, that way we give everybody a chance to talk. When you get up to testify or provide what the information you have, please give your name, your affiliation or organization that you belong to, or if you're a user of the system, a parent, you know, just why are you here? Why are you providing some testimony? Again, you know, this is scheduled to go till 7, so I don't know if any of you plan on sitting here for 3 hours, but if you do, we'll certainly have some breaks. I'm going to need at least one break, so we'll have a break. And again, as I said, there may be issues that we want to dig into and really get at the meat. You may touch on something that you think is kind of superficial, but that the council members, myself, someone in the audience may see as really critical. So we want to get as much information as we can for the council. And with that, I'm going to be wandering kind of up here, so please, I hope I don't interfere with your attention. I'm going to try to stay out of your way, but I want to take notes on some flip charts so we can put those up on the walls. I'll probably have Mayor Engen over here yelling at me for tearing paint off the wall or something, but if there's anything else?
I would just add that we will accept written testimony. So if you know of other people that you think would have liked to have been here, would have liked to have provided information to us, obviously they can come to hearings in Havre or Billings, but they can also submit written testimony. And Murray, do you have the, that, but also where people can send it? Do you have Linda's number? Or? Okay, we'll give that out before the end for sure, but there will be an opportunity to provide written comments throughout the year. This does not have an ending time except for maybe sometime at the end of the year, and so we are open for comments about this issue. And I will remind you all that MCAT is taping the hearing. It's in part so that we have a good record of this and can go back and look up things that were said, because we don't have a court reporter here or anything like that. So you just might want to be conscious of that, and that's why we do need you to speak into the microphone so that it's effective for public presentation, should there be some reason to do it. So, Murray?
I know most of you here, and thank you for coming. And with that, I'll also say that probably 90% of you, we've had these conversations before about kids with mental health issues, so I don't want you to get up and be shy right now. I'd like you guys to stand up. It's like Mark Twain says about the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. Here's an opportunity to start to do something about it. So we would encourage everybody here to speak up and let us know what's on your mind. I think we'll start with Charlie Wallenstein.
Did I push this? Is it on? Hi, I'm Charlie Wallenstein, and I appreciate the invitation to speak. I am an instructor with the School of Social Work at the University of Montana. I've also been a member of the Youth Placement Committee in Missoula for about 10 years, and prior to that I worked with Missoula Youth Homes operating shelter care for kids at risk here. I've had the opportunity to work with Murray Pierce for a long time, and so I really respect his work. I guess to start with, this is really messy work a lot of times when we work with kids, and I appreciate that when working with kids at risk, kids in the juvenile justice system, it's not black or white. I mean, I like to think in the old days, and we talked about this before, that it's not an issue of just being right or wrong a lot of times. A lot of times it's why they're right or wrong, and that's where the mental health issues come into play. And I'll speak more recently from my work at the Youth Placement Committee. Often we're presented this case of this kid. Often, there's a multitude of providers, some history, some of it's not so recent, some of it is. Go ahead.
Did I just check and make sure people can hear him? Is it clear? Okay, I'm having a little bit of trouble, and you might want to just pull the mic right in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I do think that will help make it more of a conversation, so if you're willing to do that, or... Oh, he needs to stay in place, okay. Okay, so you can see his face on the monitor. Wow, this is high-tech.
Can I send this to my mom, too?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. That in Youth Placement Committee we presented this case, and our job is to make sure a couple of things in the spirit of the youth justice system, that there's community protection and also there's a chance for this child or this youth to rehabilitate themselves, and that only comes about by getting good information. And sometimes the information is dated, sometimes the information is incomplete, and it'd be great if we had both the funding and the flexibility to have up-to-date assessments. I mean, so if I had my druthers, almost every child who goes into detention would have an up-to-date assessment or the opportunity for a mental health screen. And looking at the recent data from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, as you stated, that these kids come in with a variety of disorders, conduct disorder, oppositional defiant, substance abuse, and then there's the the other disorders that go with it, ADHD, depression. And that information would be pertinent for us. Also, some of the information is dated. Sometimes we get psychological assessments that are 1 to 2 years old. And if you look at child development, kids change a lot between the ages of 12 and 14, 12 and 16. And so when that information is dated, I think it's incomplete and doesn't do that kid service. The other part I think it's important to recognize is that most of the kids we see, and maybe Murray could add on this, is that they're poor. And so they don't get all the opportunities to have a second opinion like my kids would. And I think it's important that we get that first opinion right. That only comes from getting proper information. I'm trying to think what else he had me on the spot. The other part is just the array of treatment is important. I think, again, as I stated before, there's a multitude of providers. Therefore, I think any treatment should take into all those providers. And as you stated, evidence-based practice. We know what works. We know a lot of what works. We should do with what works. Sometimes I think we go a little bit away from that. And finally, I think, I know we're a big state. Geographically, we have some problems with this, but if we can keep kids in this community with their families, with their parents, it's the best deal. Saying all that, I think being part of Youth Placement Committee, being part of this system, we do the best with what we have, but sometimes that's not, that falls short. I don't think it comes from anyone's effort. A lot of times I think it comes from a lack of more tools to work with. And I just want us to recognize that. And finally, I think we can provide good mental health treatment and community protection. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We don't have to do one or the other, and sometimes I think as a system we get mixed with that a little bit. So with that, I'll keep my testimony brief. Thanks for the opportunity.
Just to follow up on your last point. In your opinion, the mental health system and the juvenile justice system work separately? They don't work?
I think. Wow.
They don't work as well together as they should?
I think we can do that better. I think sometimes we're hampered on funding, we're hampered on, information. I think it's just, as a system, it's not as fluid as it should be. And there's a multitude of reasons for that. I don't think it's anyone's separating that out of, commission. I think it's just more of, that there's just a lack of, I think, funding fluidity to it that could be better. And again, I think that starts from coming with assessment. Recognize when kids come in the system that an upfront assessment, if possible, would work a lot better.
Okay. And it sort of, it really summarizes why we're here today, because the systems aren't working as well together as we would like them to, so thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Alexis.
Might as well. I've got a lot of stuff to pass out. I don't want to be carrying it around. My name's Alexandra Volkerts, and I'm an attorney with the Montana Advocacy Program. For those people who aren't familiar with the Montana Advocacy Program, we're a federally funded nonprofit law firm dedicated to advocating for the rights of people with disabilities. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present today. I'd like to pass out some information so that you have it while I'm talking. I have extra copies for people in the audience if you'd like. So what I'll do is, thank you. I really need to make sure that they can see it. The Montana Advocacy Program has 7 attorneys for the entire state of Montana, and we work under 8 different federally funded programs. So each year we have to set priorities about the types of services we can offer to people with disabilities. 15 years ago, our #1 priority was investigating Pine Hills facility for boys, detention facility for boys. And for the last 5 years, we have focused on children with SED and serious disabling mental illness. SED is serious emotional disturbance. I'll try not to talk in acronyms, but unfortunately, it's sort of the nature of our work. Unfortunately, that means we come into contact with children often at their most difficult stages, and oftentimes we're called when things are at a crisis. As a consequence, I understand and recognize that our perspective is not complete. We see the problems, we don't see the successes. So I'd like to say up front that I recognize and have worked with a number of people in both juvenile and adult detention who are very dedicated, very caring, and very willing to look for solutions to problems. Unfortunately, I won't be talking about that today. I'll be talking about the problems. I've also been on vacation for 2 weeks, so I also apologize for reading this. I haven't had a chance to memorize it. I'm sure you have a number of statistics about the prevalence of youth with mental illness in the population at large and in the juvenile justice system. Estimates vary from 3 to 6% of the population have a serious mental illness, but up to 20 to 25% have a mental health diagnosis of some type. In the package of information I gave you, there is a chart which was done by the, well, there's two charts. It looks like it's done by the National Council for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, and it's a chart that looks like this. It's a single chart in the papers when you get it. And that basically breaks down the prevalence of mental health disorders among male and females in the juvenile justice system. Overall, any disorder, you'll see that 66.8% of males and 81% of females in the juvenile correctional system have a mental health diagnosis of one type or another. And then the breakdown shows you the some of the more prevalent diagnoses. And I think one of the most troubling one is the substance use disorder. 43% of boys and 55% of girls have been diagnosed with co-occurring substance abuse disorder. Unfortunately, the studies by the Department of Justice and the National Center for Mental Health indicate that from 60 to 70%, and in some cases as many as 80% of girls in residential juvenile facilities have mental health disorders. Youth with comorbid or co-occurring disorders pose a unique challenge for the juvenile justice system, not only in the intensity of their need, which is likely to be greater, and the difficulty of the appropriate response to their needs, but the need for greater resources, greater collaboration among service providers, greater skill levels, and providing a continuity of care for the child, both to divert them from the criminal justice system and to provide them with supports after they leave. This is particularly true for those youth who have mental health and substance abuse disorders. I've brought a copy of the Youth Court Act because I think it sets forth the intent of this state in how we want to treat our youth who come into contact with the criminal justice system. And I think that it expresses the best that Montana has to offer. I'll just very briefly hit the high points. It is our purpose to preserve the unity and welfare of the family whenever possible, and to provide for the care, protection, and wholesome mental and physical development of youth, to prevent and reduce youth delinquency through a system that does not seek retribution, but that provides immediate, consistent, enforceable, and avoidable consequences, a program of supervision, care, and rehabilitation, detention, and competency development, and community protection for youth before they become adult offenders, and restitution as ordered by the court. I think what's essential about this is that what we expect of our youth correctional system is very different from what we expect of our adult correctional system, and this presents a number of problems. I'd like to give some examples of some of the problems that the Montana Advocacy Program has come into contact with. In the early 1990s, the Department of Justice and the Montana Advocacy Program and a number of other youth advocacy groups participated in an investigation of the Pine Hills Correctional Facility for boys and what was then the Mountain View School for girls. And at that time, the findings showed that consistently adolescents were being referred and accepted at Pine Hills and Mountain View who had been identified as inappropriate for referral due to severe and persistent emotional impairments. That investigation led to conclusions that Pine Hills and Mountain View deprived children of their constitutional rights, including the right to personal safety, to mental health and medical services, to the use of seclusion and restraint in a consistent and non-arbitrary manner, to appropriate educational and including special educational services, and to certain other civil rights. In the package of information I've given you copies of those 1992 and 1993 letters from the Department of Justice about their findings at Pine Hills. This seems like a long time ago. Unfortunately, MAP is again currently investigating the treatment of various youths at Pine Hills. And while we have found there have been some improvements during the last 15 years, such as that there are special education services and monthly psychiatry visits that monitor medications, many of the original problems seem to still remain. Although prohibited by statute from sending youths with severe mental illness to Pine Hills, various staff at Pine Hills have estimated as many as 30 to 50% of Pine Hills youthful inmates have mental illness. Although preliminary, it appears that mental health treatment is again inadequate to meet the needs of children who are being incarcerated when community mental health services fail, and there is no other place to put them. It also appears that they are suffering abuse and neglect as a result of these placements. Since mental illness rates in the overall population range from 5 to 15%, depending on which diagnoses are included, children with SCD and mental illness appear to be disproportionately overrepresented in Pine Hills and other detention center facilities. Some examples of some of the problems that we're coming across. A youth that MAP represents was sent to Pine Hills from a small community in western Montana. He had previously been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had a history from another state of having received treatment for a mental disorder while under the supervision of juvenile authorities in that state. He was not treated for his bipolar disorder at Pine Hills, but was frequently confined to the most secure unit and locked in his cell 23 hours a day for weeks on end. He was finally sent to an out-of-state facility under our efforts so that he could finally receive treatment for his bipolar disorder, but he spent more than 9 months at Pine Hills in almost total seclusion with no treatment. Another youth MAP assisted was sent to Pine Hills after receiving many years of treatment for mental health and substance abuse issues provided by his family at their own cost with no help from public agencies. His primary diagnosis was bipolar disorder. Prior to going to Pine Hills, but while in detention, the criminal justice system had him evaluated while he was in detention, and he was labeled conduct disorder. We frequently see this with children who have behavior problems arising out of bipolar, that in fact their diagnosis within the juvenile justice system comes up conduct disorder. No records review was done prior to or during the evaluation, nor were the parents contacted for social or other information. When Pine Hills got the kid, the only information they got was the evaluation done in detention, which said he was conduct disordered, so they didn't treat him for any mental illness. They didn't contact the family for prior records upon his commitment there. He was at Pine Hills for over 6 months before any mental health treatment was started. Prior to discharge from Pine Hills, his community treatment team met and planned for his placement, but they failed to invite anyone who would be providing follow-up care for his mental health issues, so he was released to the community without any connections being made. Another youth was committed to Pine Hills at age 14 with a history of behavior problems in school and community. He had been labeled with numerous diagnoses. He was in and out of Pine Hills a number of times between the ages of 14 and 18. According to his family and MAP's initial investigation, he was not adequately screened or evaluated. He did not receive treatment for his mental health issues at Pine Hills, and he was eventually discharged from Pine Hills at the age of 18, but was on extended jurisdiction until the age of 25, a fairly common practice in Montana. 5 months after his discharge, he committed suicide. That day, he had been drinking heavily and was involved in an automobile accident. His untreated depression caused him to run from the scene, and he went home and killed himself. His family, who had thought he would get treatment in the criminal justice system, said that he not only got no treatment, but that all of his issues were exacerbated. Less than 2 years ago, 14 youths at the Pine Hills Youth Detention Center, many of them Native Americans, brought suit against the facility for pepper spraying them to the point that a number received second-degree burns, and at least one suffered an asthma attack during the spray. They alleged they were thrown into hot showers to decontaminate, contrary to all pepper spray decontamination recommendations, which significantly exacerbates the pain caused by pepper spray. During discovery for that lawsuit, youths alleged physical and sexual abuse by Pine Hill staff, inmate-on-inmate violence, which was either not prevented by staff or was actually encouraged by staff, as well as suicide attempts to escape their incarceration. That suit was lost due to the difficulty in maintaining contacts with the witnesses and plaintiffs over the 3 years it took to bring it to trial. But it raised many of the same issues that were problematic with Pine Hills in the early 1990s. This problem is not limited to Pine Hills, but shows up in many juvenile detention centers and alternative treatment facilities. Unfortunately, we do not have to go very far afield from Missoula to discover that youths in custody are not receiving rehabilitation or even minimal safety while in state custody. MAP was recently involved in an investigation of the physical abuse of a 15-year-old youth with bipolar disorder who was committed to the Swan Valley Youth Academy by the court up in Flathead, Lake County, actually. That investigation substantiated that he had been physically assaulted and injured by staff to the extent that he suffered a brain injury and severe PTSD. He had already been suffering from bipolar disorder and neurological processing problems when he was committed by the court to Swan Valley. His treatment by staff at intake was standard Swan Valley Youth Authority physical and psychological intimidation techniques, which included slamming the youths against brick walls, forcing them to excessively exercise, and then forcibly making them drink more water than they could handle to the point that they vomited, physically knocking them to the ground and jumping on them, and arbitrarily imposing seclusion and mechanical restraint on them. He was so traumatized by his treatment he attempted suicide and then was denied access to appropriate therapist or counselor during this. Eventually, we were able to get him hospitalized at Chaude Air on the acute unit due to the suicide attempt. However, his probation officer filed new charges against him, saying he had failed in his placement at Swan Valley and his probation should be revoked and he should be sent to Pine Hills. He was not sent to Pine Hills only because of the efforts of MAP. Many youth at Swan Valley Youth Authority were referred by the court, and a number of them had mental illnesses. The Child Family Services Protective Division has done an investigation of Swan Valley, but we're unable to release those results because they're confidential. Swan Valley initially agreed to a remediation plan, but then abruptly closed its operations. There are alternatives to the processes we use. As an alternative, after Hurricane Katrina, Orleans Parish in New Orleans found its services to youth in trouble substantially improved its outcomes when it entirely lost its 132 beds in 2 facilities for incarcerating youth. Both the police and the youth advocates had come to see juvenile lockup as a breeding ground to turn delinquents into hardened criminals. Juvenile court judges, the police department, local youth agencies, and Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, a project sponsored by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, came together with social workers and other advocates to come up with a new system. They decided against rebuilding the juvenile jails, as they saw them as part of the flawed system that relied too heavily on detention, with few constructive alternatives. Under the new system, violent offenders may still be detained, but most arrested children are released to their parents in order to appear in court at a later date. Nonviolent offenders are now kept under supervision through electronic monitoring and surprise drop-in visits by court staff at less than 1/10 the cost of detention. So far, it has gone smoothly with few missed court dates, according to officials. Mental health treatment services continue uninterrupted in the community and are continued to be paid from the sources they were paid from before, including Medicaid, which terminates after a child has been in detention for 30 days. So far, the new process requires that truants be monitored with ankle bracelets and by court personnel. Each arrestee is evaluated for risk and danger. The money freed up from detention is used for treatment, and youths committing misdemeanor offenses are released to family, and they are released for most things, including most probation violations, minor first offenses, loitering, running away, shoplifting, trespass, minors in possession of alcohol and drugs, etc. Currently, New Orleans Parish has created only 20 beds for detention of serious offenders. but generally only 14 on average are filled because they're doing a much better job of screening, evaluating, and treating the children. The key seems to be to evaluate with a careful eye who actually needs to be detained instead of filling beds with youths because the beds are there. All the problems that all youth face when incarcerated are magnified for youth with mental illness. Our first and foremost goal should be to prevent these children from being incarcerated in the first place. Children as young as 6 are being taken to detention, often when police are called by the schools or parents. Schools call police to remove children who are discipline problems or otherwise disruptive to the smooth operation of schools, instead of taking the responsibility to train and teach the children. Parents may call police when they are unable to obtain the necessary supports and services for their children in the community. MAP is asked over and over whether calling the police will get a child the mental health services he or she needs. Unfortunately, we are often asked this question after the parents have already called the police. RAP and ACT teams have shown to be very effective in preventing youth at risk from being institutionalized. Early identification of children at risk with individualized parent training and support have been shown to radically reduce criminal activity by at-risk youth and improve mental health outcomes. Early intervention works, it's cost-effective and humane. It saves lives and communities.
Alexis, I'm
Have
sorry
I
to
run out of
interrupt.
time?
Is there any way, I can see you've got a whole lot more.
I have a page and a half left.
If you could maybe hit some of the high points and so we could move on.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
The top recommendations that MAP has are diversion. Missoula has a mental health diversion committee which has been brought together under one of only 2 GAINS grants in the country to develop diversion for adults, and that team is currently screening and working on developing diversion for mental illness screening tools. I'm sure that the team would be happy to share their discoveries and recommendations with this committee. Our system is not doing diversion effectively. As I said, Missoula is the only city in Montana that has a program to develop a diversion committee. Untrained officers escalate minor offenses into serious criminal charges. We worked with a 12-year-old youth in the High Line who was SED, who was detained for a minor offense. Because the officers were untrained in how to work with someone with a mental illness, his minor offenses were escalated into serious charges when he kicked an officer in the stomach. We must train our officers through CIT training to work with people with mental illness. Crisis intervention training. I'm very glad to announce that Missoula's Sheriff's Department has sent 9 detention officers and what are they called? Beat police or beat officers to CIT training in April in Helena. CIT training is offered on probably about every 4 to 6 months in Montana in some communities, and we're urging our police chief to do the same. We have to do better at providing mental health treatment in the detention centers. Incarcerated youth have a constitutional right to adequate medical and mental health treatment under both the U.S. and Montana Constitution, as well as under case law. MAP is currently undertaking a survey of juvenile detention facilities to determine how adequate mental health treatment is for juveniles, but I did the survey of adult detention facilities in 2000, and I know that there were no jails except one in Montana that provided anywhere near constitutionally adequate medical and mental health care. I don't anticipate the juvenile detention center survey will be much more beneficial. And finally, training has to include appropriate training for detention officers who take care of children in detention facilities. Currently, in Montana, detention officers are trained at the Montana Law Enforcement Academy, and they train both juvenile and adult detention officers. That training is the same for juvenile and adult detention officers. There is only one program in Montana, which was developed by Valerie Weber-Rash in Billings, that is directly designed to train detention officers to work with children and to work towards rehabilitation instead of punishment. She was able to do that because she saw the incredible discrepancy between the way officers were trained and the way they needed to be trained to be focused on rehabilitation for the kids. I think that concludes my testimony. I hope you find the information helpful. Again, thank you for your time and listening, and I don't intend this as an indictment of all the people in the juvenile detention system because I know many of them, personally, I know many of them are dedicated and caring people. Thank you.
Could you turn in your written testimony as well, what you were reading to us, or send it later? Thank you.
Do I say Madam Chairman, Senator Kaufman, for the record? Steve Gibson, Youth Services Administrator, former Superintendent of Pine Hills. I was going to get up a little later, but after the last presentation, I will be brief. I might need another minute. One of the things that was handed out, and I'm located in Helena, the Pine Hills report of 1991. I'd like you to look at that just for a second. I'm not going to go through it. I left Missoula in July of 1991 to become superintendent of Pine Hills. I received a letter on August 5th from the Department of Justice saying greetings, we're coming to Pine Hills. What you see in this document is probably, at that time, was 80% true. We worked with Montana Advocacy, John McCrae, Department of Justice. This went on for 5 years. We tore down buildings. Again, I want to say most things in this report were true at that time. We were the only state that did not enter into a consent decree with the Department of Justice. We're not under monitors. We're not required to follow through because we corrected the problems. I just need to comment again, MAP has been to Pine Hills one day since 1994. I'm not going to talk about specific youth. It was mentioned that there is a statute that talks about seriously mentally ill youth not coming to corrections. I have probably, and I see Judge Larson is in the room, I have probably struggled with courts for 16 years over this issue. What we do now, also part of that statute says that if they do come to the correctional facility, we place them if they're appropriately diagnosed. We currently are trying to place 4 girls in our Riverside female facility. All 4 have been diagnosed as bipolar. We currently have 2 males, and of course all these kids are out of state. I'd like to go back. I don't know so much if it's always the funding. As Murray knows, and as Judge Larson knows, there is money for the communities for these types of placements. I believe this year there's approximately $1.7 million left. I think one of the problems is the resources. Montana is the only state in the country that does not have one psychiatric adolescent bed. That has been the case since 1987. The state of Montana sold that to a private company before that called Rivendell, and later became the Montana Women's Prison. The Warm Springs Children's Unit was closed over a lawsuit and problems in 1986. And again, I'm not advocating kids to be in Warm Springs, but there are kids that need placement that are seriously mentally ill, a small number for a small amount of time, or appropriate psychiatric placement. Right now, if a youth is seriously mentally ill, they go out of state. There are kids in Colorado. There are kids in Texas. There are kids in Arizona. There are kids all over this country, and that is not the right thing to do. As far as working with Public Health and Human Services, there's been a lot done recently. More so on the adult level. There was a STEP program that was, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that was recommended. It didn't get out through the legislature, but it was a start. There's a resolution study by Representative Callahan, I think it's HJ 24, to study mental health issues in both adult and juvenile, and hopefully that could go in line with this, as well as Senator Schmidt, which I supported and testified for many times, SJ 6, which is another study to study the juvenile justice system, and we welcome that. again, I'm just going to make it, I'm not going to defend Pine Hills. I left Missoula. It's nice to be back in Missoula. I lived in Missoula from 1983 to 1991. I left Pine Hills after 33 years. I lose these dates. 2001, a little over 6 years ago, I became the head of all of juvenile corrections for the state of Montana, other than probation, which is under the courts. I do want to say some things, though, about, and also Pine Hills has been nationally accredited since 1998, which is the only accrediting authority for juvenile corrections and adult corrections in the United States, has a membership of 25,000, which deals with mental health, which deals with all the way from physical plant to isolation. And in fact, the policy of Pine Hills for being in your room, and there are no isolation rooms at Pine Hills, there are just rooms, it's 3 days maximum with bodily injury for assault. And it has been that way for a long period of time. As far as the accusations by an individual and the 14 people, that trial was won in Helena last fall. I think connected to this, and I think it's a good time to talk about it, as well as the mental health issue, is the minority issue, which are connected. Riverside's Youth Correctional Facility has a capacity of 20 young female girls. Their minority population has been as high as 80%. At certain times, very rarely, less than 40%. Also a high number of kids with multiple misdemeanors. And yes, there are kids that get through the system, and we're seeing, if you're in the mental health business, juveniles are not usually diagnosed as schizophrenic because they don't develop that, so the next step is bipolar. We're seeing a lot of kids with bipolar, but again, the courts, and it's not all, I'm not blaming the courts, but again, it is resources possibly. Resources, maybe not so much money. And it was correct. The co-occurring disorders is probably the number one thing. I would caution, there are so many studies. I've been on the board of what was handed out with the Juvenile Mental Health Association. What the diagnosis is, who says what is. A gentleman mentioned already conduct disorder. A lot of diagnoses come to be, and then Medicaid won't pay because, we make it this, we make it that. And again, there's all kinds of numbers, but there's no doubt there are kids with serious mental illness to get into the corrections system. There are no doubt there's probably more in the adult system. There's no doubt that the state of Montana needs to quit treating people with serious mental illness as criminal. It is a disease. But again, we have what we work with, or what we get. As far as the laws, I hope that we had a bill 2 sessions ago to try to clear up the vagueness of the current statute. And I don't have the statute with me, but what it basically says, kids with serious mental illness, it uses an adult definition, should not go to the youth correctional facility. However, if they do get there, then they should be taken care of. I've never advocated. I've been in this business for 33 years. I've worked with Child Protective Services. I've been a line staff. I've been a counselor. I've done psychological testing. I've been a superintendent. Unfortunately, now I'm a bureaucrat. Not to be a bureaucrat much longer, I hope. But this has been an issue, and nationally, we talk a lot about it. I think somebody said earlier, this has been I've been on national organizations for some time. I'm on standard committees and all that type of thing. The mental health, every time we go to a national seminar, it changes throughout, gender-specific, DMC, those types of things. But for the last 15 years, it's been the top of every state's issue. Mental health in the juvenile justice system. Some states it's more of an issue because of money. Some states it's geography. The state has an issue with that. Rural communities, availability. There's not a psychiatrist east of Billings to Bismarck, North Dakota. One time I tried to hire a psychiatrist. I tried to double the salary. That was in Miles City, Montana. It's one of the reasons we did the statute. We're not going to get a psychiatrist to live in Miles City. These places were built years ago, that one in 1893, out in the middle of nowhere. It's the way it is in Wyoming. It's the way it is in a lot of states. You cannot, we contract with psychiatrists. We contract with Dr. Peak through Deaconess. Been a long relationship. We contract with psychologists in the community. The correctional facility is not the place for kids with serious mental illness. And again, I want to say serious mental illness. A lot of kids have mental health issues, and I do believe we can address those, such as conduct disorder, which if we couldn't get conduct disorders, we'd probably have, we'd lose 80% of our population. As far as secure care goes, we've reduced admissions at Pine Hills in the last 4 years by 40%. We've closed units. We have a reentry program. As Murray knows, we work with Missoula Youth Homes. We have guide homes. We have mentoring. Our recidivism rate for new felonies is 9% for a 5-year period. We have accredited schools. And again, the best thing to be is transparent. I welcome MAP. I've had meetings with MAP. I haven't met with this person. I've met with Bernie. They're welcome anytime. But again, I think it's, and I'm not trying to place blame, but I think we get into a blame game. We get the community versus Pine Hills versus this versus that. And we need to work together. And many of these kids could be treated in the community if the resources were there. And again, I think the gentleman said there are, I think of resources, I don't always think of money. I think of shifting of money. We've done that. Our budget, juvenile corrections, in the last 5 years has gone down $4 million. And the bulk of that money has been moved to the community corrections. It's gone from secure care. We've closed units, and that's what we want to do. With that, it was I thought this would be a little different, but I guess I did have to respond to some of that. And again, I'm not saying that people don't have the best intent, and I'm not going to say that there isn't a kid once in a while that doesn't slip through and get a Pine Hills. And somebody's right. I mean, the diagnosis and where it comes from and how old it is. But we do a Macy screening within 24 hours. If we see any indications, we hire psychologists and we pay for that diagnosis. And the one young man the lady talked about he was not diagnosed previously with the diagnosis. We discovered that through a contract and we placed him. But again, I'm not real comfortable with continuing to place kids in Arizona, Colorado, Texas, all over the country. And again, that's a small number of kids. I'm not advocating to have 100-bed Warm Springs, but I am advocating to have 2-4 beds available for adolescent psychiatric acute care. And we do not, and we have many great facilities, Shodare, Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch. They will not take these kids. They usually will not take these kids, and I understand that. It's a difficult population. And I'll just say one more thing. I was a superintendent for 10 years. No matter what you do in an institution, you can have psychiatrists, you can have the best people in the world, which I think we do overall. It's a weird place. It's an institution. And no one wants to raise their kids in an institution. It's a weird place. And no matter what good things happen in an institution, what's important is when they leave. That's the most important thing, is when they leave. An institution is an institution. And you see all kinds of mission statements. You see mission statements, and they all look the same. They go in cycles, and you have to do them throughout the country. Public safety, some people say rehabilitation, some people say habilitation, life skills, accountability, victims, all those things, all important. We are changing our mission statement at Pine Hills. It says, kids safe, staff safe, public safe. That's it. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Mary Ann Moon. I've been a school district employee for, I hate to admit this, almost 30 years. That's longer than you, Marie. And I just want to talk because I think you came to our communities hopefully to hear some issues that are about our communities. I certainly understand what Steve has to say about the most severe group of kids. But I think we have a population in our communities that we, as a school district, certainly try to address. And I can tell you, if you want to know where the kids are, come to school. That's where kids are, and our community struggles a lot with putting the onus on multiple agencies rather than just on the school. And I understand that, and I think we've done a nice job of ferreting some of that out. I just want to tell you that I personally have been on youth placement, I've been on foster care review, I'm on the CASA board, I'm on child care resources board, I'm on the Missoula Youth Home Placement Board, so I see a lot of kids. I see a lot of kids at school, even though I'm more of an administrator right now. And one of the tacks that we have tried as a district is to look more at prevention, and also to realize that kids now have many more needs than kids did 30 years ago. I think families are more dysfunctional. I think kids represent that and are expected to compromise and be a part of a school system. And so I think it's that middle group of kids that maybe gets lost a little bit. I understand the severe group, but I feel the same about academic needs for students. There's a severe group on one end and on the other end, and then there's a whole middle spectrum of kids. And I just want to talk to you about the fact that we have really tried to address that spectrum of kids. We've tried to look at prevention. We've partnered with other agencies in our community. We probably have a 12-year partnership with the Mental Health Center where they provide therapy in schools for severely emotionally disturbed students. We struggle with screening kids in schools. We've had in Missoula a high rate of adolescent suicide, unfortunately. And we struggle with where the school is in terms of screening, our liability issues. We have an extreme substance abuse issue with our students in Missoula County. Our data, we are 4th highest in the nation with our kids reporting their alcohol use. And so we do a lot of prevention programs. We have after-school flagship programs. We provide mental health services in the form of drug and alcohol counselors and prevention specialists in the school. We also have, in the last 7 or 8 years, partnered with our police force, and we have school resource officers. So we really try to hit things from many, many angles. I think one of my thoughts about where you folks are in studying this right now is that the almighty dollar always makes a difference about what kinds of services and how services are limited. And I was just looking at what happened in this recent legislature, and I think things look more promising in terms of possibly some money for Medicaid program, TIPS programs, those kinds of programs that we feel help that middle group of kids. But we struggle with not being able to define, let alone meet, kids' mental health needs. I know Steve talked about psychiatric care. We have, even in our community, which is a larger community, we have limited children's psychiatric care because people just don't want to do that. We can't attract those kind of professionals. So I certainly don't have any answers, but I really wanted to express to you on a more micro level what we as a community face and what we think, what solutions we've looked at and what we think that we want to continue to look at as a community. We've really done a strong partnership with our community resources. We're proud of that, and we want to be able to continue that. But again, money becomes the issue for our students. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Lose. I'm the director of Friends to Youth, which is a small nonprofit in Missoula, kind of unique to Missoula, providing outpatient mental health counseling to youth up to age 21 and their families, and also providing family-based services where there's risk of youth going into placement or has been in placement and needs support, or the family needs support for the youth to be able to return home. That family-based service is used both by Child and Family Services Division and Youth Court. I guess, just trying to think systemically about some of the issues, one of the places that I think needs more focus is earlier intervention. I mean, we're not just talking about, I hope, the issue of, when kids happen to end up in the juvenile court system in some way, shape, or form, because some of the mental health issues that need to be addressed could be addressed much earlier. And in looking at it from that perspective, part of the issue, I think, is access to mental health care and having the appropriate levels of resources in the community to provide that. I think here in Missoula, we're unique in some ways in that there was effort many years ago to establish more services for youth. When Friends to Youth was established, it was out of concern for kids in the youth court system. And that led to establishing ultimately the outpatient counseling for in our program, as well as family-based services. But one of the things that we run into, and I was just thinking about this very recently, because recently meeting with a mom of a six-year-old who obviously is not in the youth court system yet, but was acting out in ways that alarmed mom, and she approached someone from the detention facility because she was worried that's where he was going to end up. Not to have him put there, but to find out what can be done to prevent that from ultimately happening. And in talking with her, it's clear that there's part of the issue is, one of the things Charlie talked about, is funding for assessment. This is a youth that is on Medicaid, and Medicaid is very limited in terms of funding mental health assessment for youth. And this youth has some developmental issues that we'll be working with mom to try to find funding for some comprehensive assessment, because he's exhibiting some developmental delays in his emotional development that are a serious concern. Another issue is that we just have many people that fall outside of any kind of support for access to mental health counseling or community and school-based treatment, day treatment, anything of that sort. If they happen to be on Medicaid and happen to qualify for that service, they may get in if it's available in their community, but it may not be, and they may not be eligible for Medicaid, or they might not be eligible for CHIPS, or they may have insurance through the family that has inadequate coverage for mental health services. So just looking at the overall issue of access to community-based mental health services is an issue, I think, that needs to be addressed. The other thing that has already been touched on somewhat, so I won't talk about it a lot, is the issue of having the right resources available. Again, we're fortunate in Missoula in that we have a community group funded through SAMHSA dollars, the Kids Management Authority, that is trying to address that issue of the great gaps in services, especially for children that and youth that have multiple needs and are involved with many different agencies. But that's only identifying the gaps at this point. Filling in those gaps is a whole other piece of work. We have services for some kids that other kids can't access, and we have some services that just don't exist, or they're so limited. The family-based services that we provide are, it's very difficult to get into that service because the dollars for that are so limited. Community and school comprehensive treatment programs are only accessible to some youth in some schools. Day treatment doesn't really exist. Partial hospitalization exists for some kids for under some funding. So that, issues of that, I think, are part of the systemic issue that I think needs to be looked at as well, not just as kids become known to the juvenile justice system, but earlier than that. And as Mary Ann was talking about, working together with schools and other agencies, those needs certainly can be identified, but filling in the gaps is a funding issue. Thank you.
Joe, just 1 second. I'm going to turn my back so to show you that I don't like rules. I'm going to break one of the rules of the council. You mentioned something that was of interest to me, and I'd like just a show of hands maybe of folks. You talked about kids with mental health issues that had other issues, other disabilities. Can you give a percentage, ballpark, of the number of kids that you run into that have mental health issues that also have something else, whether it's a developmental disability, a physical disability?
It would be ballpark and certainly not scientific at all. But, I would say, a quarter of those kids with some mental health issue, there is some kind of developmental issue going on. And I'm including in that those with, an issue of maybe something that's affecting their wiring, their wiring in their brain development, a delay or something that is more of a physiological problem.
Thank you. And I think by definition, kids with mental health issues under the age of 22 are typically going to fall into the developmental disabilities arena. And I think one of the problems, and I don't know if anybody's going to touch on it, but it is, what category do you fall into? Who's going to fund the services? And a lot of times, kids, families are juggling and going back and forth, and oftentimes they're falling through the crevices, not the cracks, but the crevices. So just a show of hands, how people who work with kids or who have kids with mental health issues, how many would you say a percentage of those have, say 50% of those that have multiple disabilities?
Can I just say, I think the majority of the kids you see it's referred to as co-occurring, but it's substance abuse and mental health issues. The substance abuse becomes a self-medicating pattern for kids that have certain mental health issues.
Okay.
I think that's what we see
That's what you see most? Okay. Just to repeat that for the television, what was said was what's seen most is substance abuse as self-medication for the mental health issues. Alexis?
One of the charts I passed out shows that 43% of the children that were surveyed in the Department of Justice or the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Survey had 4 or more other diagnoses. 4 or more. And it breaks down how many had a single diagnosis, how many had 2, how many had 3 in them. But almost half of them had 4 or more diagnoses, which indicates that oftentimes either the initial evaluations that come up with the diagnoses are not very firm, so everybody disagrees about what it is, or these children are also grappling with a number of issues besides just mental illness.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have anything to say about that breaking the rule topic? Okay, thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Marcia Katz. I work at the Rural Institute on Disability at the University of Montana. While I've been there for 8 years, most of my work has been community-based, not research-based, and I come from a background of working in the community for over 20 years before that with people with all kinds of disabilities, including mental health disabilities, and spent a lot of time working in juvenile court in Michigan. Rather than, I don't have the same kind of specific community experience here that many of the folks who are testifying have. There are some issues, though, and actually you can tell Bob and I are married because we thought about that same issue at the same time, that are issues that are going to need to be dealt with, some of them more global, some of them more specific, some of them with some specific strategies that may help as we look at trying to do a better job of treating young people with mental illness and who also have juvenile justice issues. One of those is this issue of siloed funding. And that's something that several people have brought up in different ways, that you're only allowed to have one disability for the most part, because that's the way the funding streams go. And that sort of partners with the fact that funding sources are both very limited and also very discrete. I think Mr. Gibson mentioned about the issues of diagnosis and looking at Medicaid and what will Medicaid pay for, and sometimes diagnosis may turn up one way or another on paper simply to allow for some funding stream. Young people, like adults, are not treated holistically. And if you have a developmental disability, and this is certainly one of the things I know Bob was referring to, you can't also have mental health issues because there isn't treatment available for both of those. Now, in terms of some of that, there are certain things that Medicaid will pay for on a mandatory basis, but states have the option to create in their own state plans some optional services that they can then pay for, or if those things fall outside the parameters of what would be matched by the federal government in Medicaid, then there's also the option of states doing some things just totally on their own, which is clearly what we have at Warm Springs. That's something that the state funds, and there's no federal Medicaid match that comes for that. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form supporting institutionalization because I don't believe in that, but I was just talking about in terms of the funding stream. One of the other things that I'm curious about is the facilities that are available for people. If we look at multiple disabilities or young people with more than one disability, to what extent are treatment programs accessible to them based on whatever disability they might have? And to what extent are the payment mechanisms also ADA compliant, if you will, in terms of assuring that, for instance, somebody with a developmental disability might need more time in treatment in order to grasp certain kinds of things, but yet the insurance, or whether that's Medicaid or private insurance, may only pay for a discrete number of visits. So those are some of the kinds of things that we also have to be looking at just systemically. One of the things that also impacts treatment, but is going to be much harder for us to deal with, is the fact that there is a tremendous stigma attached to mental health disabilities, mental illness. And as a result, whether it's individuals themselves or their families are often reluctant to disclose that those disabilities exist. And if you don't disclose, it's a lot harder to get treatment or to get appropriate treatment. We have to begin to work on better ways to stop making mental illness and disability in general the other, and that it's an all of us issue. But that one's going to be a little bit tougher, I think, than some of these other ones that could be more concretely dealt with. A number of people have talked about some of the statistics and minorities in treatment, and I think Mr. Gibson mentioned something about an 80% minority population. I think that there's some exploration that needs to be done there to find out why that is. And I don't know how much of that is related to income. I don't know how much of that is related to young people coming from frontier and tribal communities far away where there are not the same kinds of access that we might have here in Missoula or the folks in Billings might have. I'd be curious to know exactly what is causing that, and not to jump to conclusions about it. But it can still be sort of, if you will, racist-based, but not in an overt way. It may be something that's more subtle than that. One of the other studies that has been done by a professor at University of Montana looked at the recidivism rate in, I think it was Deer Lodge, and came out with some conclusions. And the person that I'd hoped would be able to talk more about this wasn't able to make it today, but this is certainly available, where return visits or recidivism to the prison, there was absolutely a correlation between the fact that somebody was Indian and how many times they ended up in Deer Lodge. And I don't know all of the parameters of the study, but I would encourage the civil rights folks in the state to look at that, and by extrapolation, I would also look at whether there's some application or implication there for the youth system as well. One of the other things that I know from personal experience with a friend's family is that some of the treatment, even in the best places, is not necessarily culturally competent. And again, that's not something that people intend. They don't intend to not take into account culture. But part of the problem is that treatment programs and milieus and modalities are all designed without the partnership of minority populations that they may be treating, whether that's going to be folks who are Indian, who are black, who are of Asian descent, who are of Hispanic descent, or who have disabilities, or for young people, for that matter. I think that in order for things to be successful, you really have to subscribe to a nothing about us without us perspective, and that means involving the people in terms of trying to figure out what's going to work, partnering with people. Don't assume that just because somebody has a degree that they have some special dispensation from the Pope that they're the only ones who can provide support and services to somebody. I think it's really important to involve the people who are the experts on their own backgrounds and make sure that those things are being taken into consideration. One of the other things that I have seen a lot of in my older than dirt, 30 years and working with folks with disabilities is that there may be a number of young people showing up in some of these settings who have been born with whether you call it fetal alcohol syndrome, fetal alcohol effects, alcohol-related neurological disorders. And many of those get misdiagnosed as having things like whether it's a conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder. It's real easy. But somebody talked about the wiring, and that's one of the things, because that's a brain injury that occurs before birth. That's one of the things that does in fact impact that wiring and creates actual holes in the brain. And a child who may be able to do something once may then be blamed for not being able to do it again when it's not their fault. It's actually, it makes a whole lot of sense when you look at the holes in their brain. It's part of that disability. In addition, many of those young people exhibit attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and as a result of the being born with the fetal alcohol syndrome or effects and some of those other things, they may not respond to treatment in the same way. They may need modifications in treatment. They may need accommodations in counseling. They may need people who specifically can deal with those kinds of disabilities, and medications may not affect them the same way. So there can't be a cookie-cutter approach in that regard. So I would also, underscore what the first gentleman had talked about in terms of some kind of assessment and where there might be specifically something that is neurologically based, to assure that that's identified, because otherwise it's just going to set the child up for failure, especially in systems that are based on where your good behavior is rewarded by points or by more privileges or more freedom. Many of these kids who have neurologically based disabilities to begin with, whether they are solely that or co-occurring with a mental health disability, can't meet those kinds of requirements because they can't necessarily repeat things one time after another. There are other ways that you have to work with them in order to help create behavior change and help them become more in control of their own life. Okay, that was it for me. So thank you very much.
I'm the most stable one, so I'll go first. Thank you and good evening. My name is Captain Dick Lewis. I'm with the Missoula Police Department. And I'm going to hopefully give a little bit of change of perspective here and concentrate and talk a little bit about first responder needs. And one of the things I've not heard in anyone talk about is, as first responders, law enforcement deal with the problem every time, first time, 20th time. They're the ones on the scene when these folks most of the time are in their crisis. And most of it's a very serious crisis. So one of our frustrations becomes our inability to have an alternative to jail or to criminal charges. As Murray knows, being in youth court, situations often aren't as cut and dry of return it to the family when the family is very dysfunctional and when the family has many other issues that what I call a short Band-Aid of a first responder type response is not going to fix. So the things that sometimes happens in law enforcement is we get to a point where you have nowhere else to go, no alternative, no way of knowing that in your brief time, your ability to diagnose someone who has a disease such as mental illness is a challenge at best. Well, I implore training. We train as much as possible whenever available. That has to go hand in hand with somewhere to take these individuals besides a detention facility, a jail setting. Right now, law enforcement has very, very few options to be able to do this. And I will guarantee you, a large percentage of the time, these folks are not in crisis between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. And the other frustration we find is when we find a young individual, especially with confidentiality the way it is, we have no access to any information of any diagnosis of any kind that would indicate to an officer, I need to go somewhere to do something besides put him in jail, release him into a dysfunctional situation where we're going to return, or just do nothing at all. So it becomes very frustrating and difficult. I've been in law enforcement 31 years. I've been in juvenile work since the day I started. I've been an SRO and all those kind of things. And I can tell you that when you have a 22-year-old officer who has less than a year of experience on the street and they run into one of these situations, it becomes difficult at best to try to make sure we're covering the needs of that individual as well as the safety and needs of society. So without an alternative where we can take someone where they have access to prior diagnosis, prior information, or at least can make that diagnosis or some kind of a screening, we're really handcuffed in our ability to treat this and to respond to this. Our best alternative is go to an ER doctor who is going to look at that individual most of the time and say, your insurance company's who? I'm sorry. And those kind of questions rather than we need to address a need here. We also run into the situation where most of our folks that we run into have multiple issues, whether it's chemical dependency, whether it's physical disabilities, or whether it's just a mental illness, or whether it's a combination of all those, as well as dysfunctional families, as well as all kinds of other things. And when we're there and we're all in crisis and they're in crisis, it becomes difficult without alternatives to try to get a course of action that is consistent based on anything we're doing right now. So to me, if we're going to start the problem, Folks in the long-term care, we appreciate that long-term care. We appreciate their ability to diagnose when they have a lot of time, a lot of facility, and a lot of availability of people who have the credentials and certificates and training to diagnose and do those things. Where our biggest need is that first responder, that first contact, that inability to take that contact and make that a positive thing for that individual, rather than turning that into a criminal record, a criminal activity based on that is our option right now.
Captain Lewis, do you know of any programs around the country whose demographics are similar to those here in Missoula that have an effective program that operates that way?
We had a discussion with some of the folks from mental health at St. Pat's, and one of the things they indicated are there have been programs attempted and started that, to my knowledge, are no longer in service because of funding issues. But there was a clearinghouse where when you had an opportunity to run into an individual that it wasn't one of these flat criminal things, it was someone that with a basic screening training for a first responder, an officer, could take to a clearinghouse. And that determination would be made then of where is the best place for this individual to be. And we did have those discussions. St. Pat's was involved, but with the lack of funding, the lack of ability to make it a 24-hour service, it kind of fell through. Because like they say, during the day it's great, we're there, bring them down, that kind of thing, but after 5, and between 5 and 8 o'clock in the morning is a tremendous amount of time where a lot of crisis happens in individuals after the school hour. They have school facilities and services that give those folks an opportunity to address some of those issues. But then they come home, they're out of the arena where the help is and where the things are offered, and the structure goes away. And when that structure goes away and there's no structure at home, we're into those problems. So, Murray, the answer to that, I guess, is not right now, to my knowledge, that's going on in any demographics around here. It has been discussed, and there's programs in the country, but in much larger cities where they have much different funding sources and availability of folks to staff these facilities.
Captain, you and I probably agree a lot on the whole training issue. As an alternative to training, do any of your officers get involved with community programs, community-based programs, specifically with youth with mental health issues, so that they can get to know some of the dynamics that may be occurring, not necessarily in crisis, but in a mental health situation?
Part of what we've seen, at least in our experience with our police department, is having 67 officers as first responders. We've not been made aware of opportunities within our mental health community for those kind of interactions and things. The other thing is a lot of those programs we run 24/7, so therefore our officers are off at odd hours and odd times, and if you don't make the meeting at 4 o'clock or if you don't make the meeting at 2 o'clock, it becomes difficult to participate. So those are kind of the drawbacks, but we don't, right now we've had people on Friends to Youth and some of those in the past and been a part of that kind of groups and some of those things, and we've been invited to some of the group homes once in a while to be on a board, Watson's Children's Center, those kind of things. But as far as that right specific in mental health community, to my knowledge, since I've been patrol captain, I've never been afforded an opportunity or an invitation to say, you guys can participate and here's how. I would encourage that. I mean, I think that would be something we'd be much open to. I mean, with our school resource officers, we have crisis team members in the 3 resource officers at the high schools who, when something happens at the school, they're available for that crisis team. The same with our middle school pros officers. Our intervention is limited at best, but again, we intervene, but where do we go? It's great to have intervention, but if you can't take it somewhere and if you can't direct it somewhere, those interventions are very fruitless and very frustrating for an officer who does that, and then the next night he goes to their house, the next night he goes to the school, the next day he goes here. And again, we're right back to where's that diversion? Where can we divert this folk that we've actually identified or have someone else identify to us that here's a problem child. But in the middle of the night when I call Murray and you're on call and you say, I can't help you, Dick, I'm not familiar with this kid. He's from somewhere else. He's connected somewhere else that I'm not familiar with. I love the idea of giving him back to a parent, if I could find one. If I could find a competent parent to give that person back to, that, knowing that this person needs help, is going to get help. That's the frustration, I guess, for our first responders. And I just want to emphasize again that please don't forget about that very important link to this partnership. We all need to work together, and it doesn't do us much good to have long-term and treatment somewhere else, and we have no idea what's going on or no way to connect that through either a clearinghouse or at least somebody that will respond with all we are given. If you don't give us the tools, it's hard to build a house. So thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
My name is Peggy Miller. I am the mom of a 14-year-old boy who is one of those kids in Texas. He came to our family when he was about 4 months old, and we adopted him at age 2. At that time, they told us he had a chromosomal abnormality that would cause him to have speech and language difficulties, trouble in school, social problems, and a tendency to minor criminal activity, which you think, no way can you predict that for this little kid. But as he grew up, it was the impulsivity and the inability to read social cues, to develop a sense of right and wrong and of boundaries and of where other people's space begins and your space ends. So the neighbors would find him in their homes. When they would come home, he had just gone in. Later on, he began to take things that he found. He went next door when he was angry at the neighbor boy and cut a hole in their trampoline. And at that time, those neighbors finally called the police, which was appropriate. And he was involved with the kind of justice community panel that set some restitution for him. I have to say that all along, our advantage has been that we live in Missoula, and that really Missoula is rich in resources for kids. And in our case, especially because we became a Casey family through foster care, and then afterwards got post-adoption services from them. So we were pretty proactive as far as having him assessed, having him in therapy, getting help for him at school, the kinds of things that he needed to have happen. But it was always problematic to be able to contain him and to know where he was. We knew that he was at risk in the neighborhood, but we could not. I mean, we tried a lot of different things, two-way radios and beepers and everything we could think of to try to keep track of him, and he still could kind of slip away like mercury. And on one of those slip-away times, he was assaulted by a neighborhood boy and was raped 2 different times. And where we had thought, he'll tell us if something like this happens, he did not tell us because he felt he would be in trouble for just being somewhere where he wasn't supposed to be. So to him, it was better to have something bad happen to him than to have to admit that he had broken a family rule by being outside the boundaries where he was supposed to be. And he still, at 14, has the emotional resilience of about a 3 or 4-year-old, but he weighs 160 pounds. He's a big kid. And as his behavior became sexualized, he became dangerous, and he began to have encounters with little girls. And so he was a danger to the community as well. So at that point, he did get involved with the court. He did a burglary. He went to a friend's house, sneaked in the middle of the night, and the police became involved. And I said before that we were fortunate. We had advantages. And one of the advantages was that a team came together on his behalf that I've never met anybody else that had this much really good support from the community. But by the end, we had, when we met on his case, there were about 10 people there. Public defender, guardian ad litem, therapist, his sex offense therapist, probation officer, a teacher from the life skills class, a mental health case manager, a Casey social worker, which is through Dan Fox now, and then we would be there. And all of those people worked very hard to understand this kid and what he needed, and came to really a consensus that what he needed was to be close to his family, to be placed in Missoula, and to have the strength that family gave him while he could still have the kinds of interventions that he needed. But in the end, that was moot because there wasn't any place in Missoula that could take a kid like him. And what happened finally, we said, we will supervise him 24/7, we'll keep him close. And we put an alarm on the door, and we just had him with us all the time. But he was an elusive guy, and he got out. And then I called the police right away within 5 minutes. But the procedure for the police then is you have to go downtown and report him as a runaway. And I said, I can't take the time to do that because if I can find him right now, I could keep something from happening. But I couldn't find him in time. And so he had violated his probation. And his probation officer said, I'm going to have to put him in jail. I mean, we all knew we did not want him to go to jail, but there wasn't anywhere else that he would be safe and that the community would be safe. And so he ended up staying in jail for 5 weeks while we looked for a place where he could go. And that turned out to be Texas. And during that time, because it's the rules of the jail, we asked the judge, and he said, you know, we just really don't try to tell the jail what to do, but we could not touch him, and we had to see him through the glass. And in the courtroom, it's against the law to touch them. And he is a little boy. And on the last week, I said, today in court, I will find a way to touch you. And when we were done and we were just turning away, I just turned and just snagged him with a finger. Because he's a little kid that still sits on his mom and dad's lap at 160 pounds. And when he went to Texas, then it was possible for me to fly down with him. And I have to say that the facility in Texas is very, very good. And it keeps him safe, and he has intensive therapy. But he is there with some pretty hardcore kids. And he does not have very good emotional resilience. And he gets very, very homesick and discouraged and depressed. And I think somebody said, you know, the kids with developmental delays, it takes them longer to learn. So he'll be there probably for more than a year, unless he runs out of funding. And I still think, and Murray was in on this, I just said, what if we could just put an electronic tag on him? Because we had a thing that was made for toddlers at the mall. But everybody on the team just said, you know that he'll get around that. And there wasn't available in Missoula for kids that electronic monitoring that would have made it possible for me to find him right now, to know when he went out the door, and then just to get him back. But I think of how much Medicaid is spending to keep him in Texas, and I think it might have been cheaper to put that on him because we were willing to do that surveillance for him, and he was doing really well in school, and his therapy here was very good and very focused. And the trade-off has been that it's more intensive in Texas. It's more secure than even what we could do electronically, but we will probably not see him now until he comes back. And when he does, it looks like he might go to Boulder for a while to a group home there, which will make it possible for us to see him more often. But mostly I just want to say how much everybody worked to help something good happen for him. And then in the end, it just seemed like we hit a wall and we couldn't get past that place where we just had to say it's either mental health or judicial system. And the judicial system just has to operate in this particular way. And even that seemed fair. I couldn't say that that didn't seem fair, but it really, my heart was broken to take him to Texas and to leave him there, and it still catches up on me, and I am not doing very well at telling his story. But The thing is that we were able to get him to SHODARE, and we were able to get him the neuropsych eval, and we were able to get him good therapy, and people could understand exactly what his issues were. But when it came right down to it, we still didn't really have the way to take care of him. And I don't know what that would take to change that, but that's just the human face of what we're talking about.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Erler, and I'm a program officer with Children's Mental Health Bureau. That's a state bureau that oversees Medicaid services for youth with serious emotional disturbances. And, Peggy's story was very, very heartbreaking to me. I'd like to tell you that currently our bureau funds 55 kids in out-of-state residential treatment, and 43 of those are in Texas. And we have 3 residential treatment centers in Montana, and if we have a youth that is Medicaid eligible, that is in need of residential treatment, they have to be denied at all 3 of those. And typically the kids that we have to look at out-of-state facilities are just like the son that Peggy described. They are youth that have serious emotional disturbances that also have developmental delay and or are sex offenders. We have no place in Montana that will accept those youth at the residential treatment center level. And it's a resource issue. It's been very, very difficult to build capacity for that. As these kids are ready to step back down into Montana, typically to a group home before they go home, once again, we really struggle with what's an appropriate placement and what provider is willing to take this child. We had another youth that was in a Texas facility for 17 months, and he was ready to discharge after about 13 months. And we could not build a program for him here because it was a resource issue. It was not a money issue. Medicaid was more than willing to pay. So the other thing that our bureau does is we oversee the development of systems of care programs in Montana, and building capacity is something that we are really, really trying to do through that program. Here in Missoula, we are building capacity through, we recently licensed a new mental health center, so that expands capacity to serve kids. The Systems of Care program is really a neat program, and very much like the team that Peggy described that came together with the mental health therapist, the parents, the probation officers, the school folks, parents driving those plans and trying to keep that kid at home and in the community. We do have a conference coming up in Billings, and I welcome anybody to come to that. I have some brochures. I'll leave some with you and anybody in the audience that would like one. It is free, and currently we have 17 sites in Montana that are building systems of care. At the local level, those are known as Kids Management Authorities. And we do have a number of folks here in the audience that participate in KMAs, and Steve actually participates at the state level. And so it's a relatively new project. We've got some growing pains, but there are efforts to partner with juvenile justice for kids that have serious emotional disturbances. Let's see, what else? I'd like to say that I've seen a chart of Montana Medicaid services for youth with serious emotional disturbances compared to other states. And while our reimbursement rate may not be the greatest, I don't honestly know how it compares, we do have one of the richest array of reimbursements, services that we authorize, I should say. in the country. It's really quite amazing when you look and you see that other states don't offer therapeutic aid services or, maybe comprehensive school and community-based treatment. But once again, it's an issue of building capacity. And those are only for kids that are Medicaid eligible, and we have a huge population of kids that are involved in the juvenile justice with serious emotional disturbances that don't qualify for Medicaid, don't qualify for CHIPS. I'd also like to put a plug in for CHIPS. CHIPS recently authorized expanded mental health benefits for youth with serious emotional disturbances. And currently that plan is really underutilized. Last I heard, there were about 50 kids accessing that, and they anticipated more like 300. So if you have youth coming across in your juvenile justice system, and they're on CHIPS, ask about that. Feel free to give anybody in Children's Mental Health Bureau a call, and we can help you with that. Let's see. One of the things that I don't honestly know if this is already being done within youth court, but it seems to me that we need to catch kids on the front door. When they first make that contact with youth court, let's think about doing some real basic mental health screening and get them into services before they move into the detention arena and lose their Medicaid. There's nothing more heartbreaking than seeing a kid who has not received mental health services in detention. We cannot pay for that, and that's a federal policy, and I don't anticipate any change in that. I have the fortune of working a bit with Sergeant Gary Evans of the detention center here, and he's just a jewel of a person. He recognizes the need for kids in detention to get mental health services. And so let's help him make that a reality. He truly sees the need. One of the last things I would like to say is, as kids return to the communities from residential treatment or from Riverside or Pine Hills, it's really critical to have a meeting with all the folks that are going to be involved in that kid's life at the table before they return. I've seen kids step back into the community, and they're special education kids, and they show up at the school door on Monday morning, and then it's literally a week before the child study team meeting, another week before the IEP, and so they sit out. We know, for the most part, I think, when these kids are going to be coming back to our community, and let's pull together a team, just like the guide homes. I don't know if the guide home still has their entry teams, but I participated in one of those once, and it was just a wonderful support for that kiddo. If there's any way, there's no way for Medicaid, there's no way that I know of, but one of the most successful things that we can do for kids is if we could find a way to have mobile mental health crisis response where skilled folks go out and deliver services to a kid in crisis at that site rather than calling the police. It's a funding issue. I think Missoula is of a size that we could probably support that, especially if we just did it, maybe after school hours till the morning, summertime. It would, in communities where this has occurred, what it has really done is cut down on acute hospitalizations. And my guess is it would also really cut down on kids going to the detention center. Those teams are able to remain with the child and the family until that child is de-escalated, and they do follow up. It's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. So that's it. Response teams? Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you know of places where that
There was a place outside of Milwaukee, and I can give you the name of a woman that worked in it, if you'd like. I think it was Milwaukee, someplace in that general area. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
Hi. My name is Brenda Desmond. I would first like to thank the Governor's Civil Rights Advisory Council for holding hearings on the important topic of youth with mental illness involved in the juvenile justice system. I am a standing master with the 4th Judicial District State Court. I frequently preside over preliminary aspects of juvenile delinquency proceedings, juvenile detention hearings, and our youth drug court. I also serve on the Youth Placement Committee, which under Section 41-5-121 of the Montana Code makes placement recommendations to the district court when young people are placed outside of the home in connection with delinquent behavior. My main message to you is that we need additional and earlier screening, like Cindy earlier recommended, intervention and treatment for young people involved in the juvenile justice system who have a mental disorder. Too often, they do not receive the treatment they need in a timely manner, and their situation and sometimes their juvenile delinquent actions become more serious. On a related note, I believe we need a more coordinated system for delivery of services for youth who turn 18 and enter the adult criminal system. I have worked in the state court system for 12 years. Part of my work has always involved working with young people charged with juvenile offenses. I have observed a large number of young people through the years. It's a bit of a generalization, but at one level, I separate the youth into two groups. Those who need a rapid juvenile justice response and will figure out without too much trouble that they are better off following the rules. The second group is composed of youth who need more complicated interventions due to factors including mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and prior victimization, abuse, or neglect. Now, I have my common sense view of which category young people fit into, but that is not adequate. We now have available sophisticated research-based tools to screen youth when they first encounter, they're available nationally. They're not necessarily available here. To screen youth when they first encounter the juvenile justice system. We need to take advantage of the progress made in behavioral and brain research to use early screening on all youth involved in the justice system. With early screening, young people who have or are developing serious substance abuse, emotional, or mental disorders can be given a response, including treatment, appropriate to their individual situation. Few would disagree as to the importance of early screening and intervention. But despite improvements, we have not succeeded in making this available to youth in the juvenile justice system as a matter of course, as we should. Going back to my two groups, the first group, the vast majority of youth charged with juvenile offenses, is composed of young people who have made a mistake, often age-related, that is unlikely to be repeated again, or at least not very frequently. For example, we have vandalism. The group of young people who I'm talking about, who might be called risk takers, impulsive, not fully developed brain-wise, that is, they don't have that fully developed frontal lobe that helps adults use good judgment and stay out of trouble. This group responds well to developmentally appropriate consequences, such as writing a letter of apology, having a stricter curfew, more careful parental supervision, reporting into youth court for a period of time, and paying for any damages they may have caused. In other words, these young people have made a mistake or a series of mistakes. They have no complicating serious substance abuse or mental health issue, and they respond well to negative, developmentally appropriate consequences With a little pressure, they can control their behavior, in my view. The second group, the group that we're more interested in today, is composed of people who have a serious substance abuse issue, a mental disorder, developmental delays, or all of the above. The most common youth court intervention responses are not adequate for these young people unless they are receiving treatment responses. They need more than what I call a rapid juvenile justice response to improve or to recover. This group is much smaller, I think, than the other group, but this group needs significant additional resources to assist their path to a healthy, productive adulthood. Research shows that if a young person has both a substance abuse disorder and a mental disorder, co-occurring disorders, if we treat one disorder and not the other, chances of positive outcomes are significantly diminished. Yet, for the most part, that's what we do right now. In both the adult and youth public health systems, the state of Montana has made serious efforts to plan for a system that will provide integrated treatment for those who have a mental disorder and a co-occurring substance abuse disorder. We have not reached the point yet that we are actually providing that kind of treatment. And in my view, the reason for that is that we have not put adequate resources into this system transformation. Because just like the research is out there to show how to adequately screen kids when they first enter the system, the research is out there to show how to adequately treat kids who have co-occurring disorders. And, I don't want to sound impatient, because there are people who are working on this problem, but yet we have so many kids who are at risk, who are getting older and older, and who are not getting the best kind of treatment that we know is available. Most of the hardworking people involved in providing treatment services to young people in the juvenile justice system are very dedicated. Yet they are also aware that despite their best efforts, if young people with a mental disorder or co-occurring disorder do not get the type and level of treatment they need, they are more likely to continue with their delinquent behavior. Even more, their substance abuse or mental disorder will continue to worsen and will become more and more difficult to treat. As well, if they continue delinquent behavior, they may then find themselves in the adult system, criminal system. Sometimes, as Captain Lewis mentioned earlier, the young person's behavior becomes so unmanageable that they are charged with juvenile offenses involving violence, and they are taken to the juvenile detention center. Technically, they then may meet the criteria for detention, for secure detention. That is, they present a serious danger to others or themselves, or are at serious risk of flight. And the detention center may be, in the moment, the least restrictive alternative to keep them safe. Yet a person with an untreated mental disorder should be in a treatment setting, not in a correctional setting, regardless of the difficulties of management of their behavior. We know that certain situations will lend themselves to kids becoming unmanageable. But just because the detention center has to take them if they meet the criteria doesn't mean that that's where they should be taken. On a related issue that I mentioned earlier, because the age of adulthood is 18, and they're not really grown up yet. Generally speaking, there's some exceptions, there's some opportunity for continuing youth court supervision over kids beyond the age of 18. But most kids, and I call them kids even though they're 18, who commit an offense after 18 are placed in the adult system. I don't think that many people would disagree that young people between the ages of 18 and 22, for example, or 26, the age of full development of that frontal lobe, should be placed, I think most people agree they should not be placed in secure custody situations with older adults or even receiving treatment services with older adults. This unfortunate situation is much more serious when the kids also have a serious mental disorder. We need to have two things. We need to have a seamless transition. I know we've all heard that word too often, but I simply couldn't think of another one. Between the youth court system and the adult system. When kids are making that transition, kids actually literally are sometimes walked from the juvenile detention center over to the adult side when they turn 18. That's not the kind of seamless transition I'm talking about. We need a seamless treatment transition so that if they're receiving adults if they're receiving services in the youth system, they need to be immediately connected to mental health and substance abuse services in the adult system. And secondly, I think we need a separate track of services and correctional response for younger members of the adult system. These kids who are between the ages of, I'll say, 18 and 26, have very different needs than a person who's 35, 40, 45. Why am I so concerned about this? This is a very serious problem. The link between substance abuse and delinquent behavior is clearly established. Further, the link between untreated mental disorders and substance abuse is also clearly established. So again, we have the information we need to make a change. A recent report, very recent, of the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, we call it SAMHSA, states that in the year 2005, 8.8% of youths aged 12 to 17 experienced at least one major depressive episode. And I think there's no reason to think that our statistics in Montana are any different. If anything, they're worse. Among those youth, those who experienced a major depressive episode were twice as likely in the following year to initiate alcohol use or illicit drug use. And of course, that's partly related to the fact that if people have a mental disorder and it's untreated, one thing they tend to do is try to treat it with drugs and alcohol. I mean, no doubt about that. Further, we have one of the highest adolescent suicide rates in the country, and our rate in Missoula is high for our state. The young people in the youth court system are especially at risk for self-harm because so many of them have a substance abuse disorder or a mental health disorder or a mental disorder or both. In the adult system, the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Health and Human Services have made great strides in trying to span the gap between the services offered by the Department of Public Health and Human Services, the services offered by the Department of Corrections to adults in the system, and the Kids Management Authority and systems of care work that Cindy earlier mentioned has been very significant in the provision of services to kids at risk. But we need to do much more to make that connection. The young people we see in the juvenile justice system, as I think was very dramatically shown by the earlier witness, who I didn't get your name, are the children of our friends and neighbors. They are members of our community. We have the knowledge and ability to provide the treatment they need. They deserve better. We can bring together the resources to improve our response to them, and we should. Thank you. I knew you'd have a question. I mean, I like your questions.
I want to make sure that I heard you right.
Okay.
Were you saying that you didn't think that anyone between the age of 18 and 26 should be in an adult situation, particularly if they have a mental health issue?
That's my view.
Okay, that's fine.
I think we really have, maybe, I'm sure there are very mature 24-year-olds, but in general, I think we have taken the approach that when someone turns 18, they actually are an adult in terms of the kind of responsibility they can take, the kind of insight they have, and I think the experience we've had, plus the recent brain research that makes so clear that their brains are not fully developed until they're 26, that's why I said 26, to me means the interventions that may be appropriate for a 30-year-old adult, both in treatment and corrections, generally speaking, are not the same interventions that should be used with those younger kids. I was concerned that was a little off point with what I what I was trying to say here, but I think it's so true, especially if kids have the extra level of having a mental disorder. Yeah.
That's more my take on it, but I want to...
Yeah, that's what I meant. So I think we should have 3 systems.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hello. My name is Susan Hansky. I'm a registered nurse and coordinator of an adolescent outpatient program at St. Patrick Hospital here in Missoula. Many of the patients that we see have youth court involvement at some level, maybe informal probation, or they may in fact have recently been in detention. For many years, mental health professionals have utilized youth court services as a lever to get individuals into treatment. This involvement may provide a strong external motivating factor for individuals and families to seek treatment, and we appreciate having that ability. It is not unusual for an adolescent with mental health issues to exhibit acting out behaviors. Often, to maintain control, parents are encouraged or required to have their children cited for these behaviors. Thus, the child may rack up charges for things such as ungovernable behavior, runaway, or youth in need of intervention. Or they may end up having more serious, real criminal charges. Unfortunately, involving adolescents in youth court can lead to criminalizing these patients. This leads to involvement in the court system rather than involvement in the mental health system. And it leads to detention rather than treatment. I know parents and professionals alike can become frustrated with what seems to be a very inefficient way to obtain mental health services for the children. While I certainly do not have all the answers, I would like to share a few observations about some things that I think could improve services and care for the adolescents and support for their families who struggle with these issues. We need to have a process for obtaining mental health assessments in a timely fashion. This is especially true of adolescents in the detention center. Of course, we need to assess suicidal or homicidal ideation, but we also need thorough mental health assessment and treatment recommendations. After the assessment, we need access to care. Medications may or may not be beneficial. If recommended, if medications are recommended, the individual would need access to a psychiatrist or an advanced practice registered nurse who can prescribe and follow those medications. We need other mental health professionals to provide counseling for individuals and families on an ongoing basis. The need for funding for these services may be our biggest challenge. I would imagine a study to determine the number of individuals we're talking about who fall into this category would be helpful information. Perhaps you know that already. But what I see, and in summary, what I would like to say is we need to have improved access to assessment. We need ongoing treatment for patients and families. And of course, we need to be able to fund these services. Thank you.
My name is John Larson. I'm one of the 4 district judges in the 4th Judicial District. I want to also thank the Governor's Advisory Commission on Civil Rights for having this forum and this hearing. It's helpful for me to come and listen. It's helpful for people to have the opportunity to speak out about their issues with juvenile justice and mental health. I've learned a lot just by sitting here today, and I can tell you that in the 14 years that I've sat on the bench, it's been a continuing evolution, my knowledge and my efforts to address some of these issues. And I want to also say that I've had a lot of help. Ms. Desmond, Mr. Pierce, many of the other folks in this room have provided me education, because as one of the people who makes the final decisions in many of the cases, we have little training in the area of mental health. You don't get trained, you don't have to have a degree in mental health to be a judge, and you don't really get a lot of training, at least when I went to law school, about many of the other issues that you confront when you take the bench. So I've had to get on-the-job training, and as a result of being in this community, having Ms. Desmond help me write some grants, and being hooked up through people that Mr. Pierce has come across, people in my judicial organization, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, we've been able to bring cross-training to Missoula and participate in other cross-training that other groups have brought to Missoula. And that pollinization, such as what's happening right here today, is very key to keep juvenile justice and mental health at the forefront. We only comprise about 1% of the current Department of Corrections budget, $4 million. But that $4 million is being, I think, more wisely used now than it was when I came. We've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. We've had some incentives that the Department of Corrections, Mr. Gibson, his superiors, his division have made available to the judicial districts. We've learned some things that don't work, and we've learned some of the problems that occur when we bring people home from long out-of-town placements, whether they're 100 miles away or 2,000 miles away. And I have visited these kids in these placements, and I've visited the Texas treatment programs. I'm comfortable with what they're doing there. My issues relate to bringing them home. I serve on the State Systems of Care Committee with Ms. Erler and Mr. Gibson, and that's our big challenge, is when these kids come home, when they get all to be about 18, as Ms. Desmond mentioned, what do we do then to keep them progressing, to keep them out of the adult system, and to protect our communities? And every one of these young people presents a different case. Fortunately, our knowledge of how that brain works and how it develops is also advancing. We're getting satellite technology available so we can track where an individual is minute by minute. It's not available yet in youth court, but I've started using it on the adult side. So on those cases that we do need to very closely track, and if it would be of benefit to everyone, we can do that. But we need to be more than tracking. We need to be ahead of that issue. We need to devote the resources early on. There are systems available through our juvenile justice computer system now where we can begin that evaluation early, and I know our youth court is beginning to do that. We're beginning to divert more and more kids early. We are placing fewer kids out of the community and out of the state. We're dealing with them more directly in their own families, in their own homes, and in our group homes. Those are all positive steps, but the issues are still there. There's still heartbreak, and there's still danger. We have one of the highest alcohol uses in the state in this community, and that drug is continually underestimated in the damage that it does to our young people. And I've began my judicial career trying to coordinate with the other judges here on alcohol issues, and I'm reinvigorating that issue. The dynamics of alcohol and mental health are ones that I'm prioritizing now, because once you find that repeated alcohol use and you scratch the surface, you'll find issues in the home, issues in the family, and other issues with that young person. Certainly there's a cultural connection as well, because many of our lower income and Native American families have significant impacts through alcohol. And again, that challenge is presented early on, and we need to work on it aggressively so that we can keep those cultural minorities in the state, particularly the Native Americans, out of our prisons. I was just to the Montana State Women's Prison, toured all the programs there. Easily 45 to 50% of those occupants are women. The average age is 32, so they're young women. And many of them are having babies, either as they go in, while they're there, or as they're leaving. 2 blocks down the street is the Passages program, which you'll see if you haven't already been to Billings. It's the old Howard Johnson's motel that's being remodeled for treatment by their nonprofit entity for adult treatment. And again, I went there to deliver some clothes to an adult woman who I'd worked with as a juvenile, as a judge. And her issues related to mental health and chemicals, she was somewhat successful here in our programs, but methamphetamine introduced her to another variant. So our efforts, if we're successful, and even though I was in part successful with her, she has something to build on there in Billings now, and hopefully will avoid going 2 blocks up the street to the state prison. And that's our hope. So I, again, am very happy to join the group that's here, and I think we're very fortunate in Missoula to have the range of folks that we do who are interested in this issue.
Judge, before you go, there's been a little bit of talk about JDAI, it's the Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative, and would you kind of speak a little bit about that, please?
I think it's 2 and almost 3 years now, we invited Bart Lubau up to Missoula, and he made a special trip here. We invited folks from our region as well as from Helena to attend that introduction to JDAI, and I believe that at the end of June, there'll be a kickoff for the JDI initiative through the Board of Crime Control as sort of the coordinating entity. And it is designed to use detention less frequently, to develop other alternatives, and to educate the entire community, beginning at the police level. And we have good law enforcement support here in Missoula. We have a member of the juvenile detachment working with JDAI. So we've got a great start here in Missoula, and I believe that there are other communities in the state that will be joining this initiative. We have a lot of other communities around the country that we can rely on, so we're not reinventing the wheel. And there's annual conferences and, of course, websites and already lots of studies so that we can implement practices that have been proven to be effective. So JDI certainly has a component that's very focused on both chemical dependency and mental health. And they have communities our size, communities that are larger, and communities that are smaller that have implemented those approaches. The team approach that's been mentioned in both systems of care and our drug courts, I believe is the most beneficial, the most effective, and the most responsive. We staff cases every week. We monitor these families during the week, and we visit their homes during the week. And you can't imagine what goes on unless you're actually there. If you only see them 3 or 4 times, which is the normal juvenile justice contact judge with a juvenile, you have no concept of what's occurring. As part of the JDI, I conduct holiday detention hearings, and I didn't have to fight too much among my colleagues to get that opportunity, but I have done it since Mr. Lubau was here last October. And again, it's very amazing. We get the whole family here on the weekends. Sunday morning, Dad isn't working, Mom's available, and we can take a little more time in a juvenile detention hearing and kind of find out really what's going on. Some of these are blended families as well. So those hearings, just as a little aside, is something that JDI encouraged me to do. I've done it. It's a small little step, but it gives me another little piece to build on.
Just a couple of questions, Judge. I just want to clarify one thing. You said you were down at the women's prison,
Yes,
and I think you said 45 to 50%
yes.
were women?
We're Native Americans, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay. I just,
It's been a long day.
I
I
hear
do
you.
about 60 cases on Thursdays.
No, I hear you.
And I've been doing this 14 years too, so that takes its toll as well.
I want to ask, this electronic tracking has come up a couple of times. And I hope that small molecule of John Ashcroft in me doesn't come out. But I heard a story on NPR last night about parents who are getting their kids phones with GPS systems. If parents can track their kids theoretically without problems with the GPS system, assuming that the mountains wouldn't be a problem, is there a legal issue that says you cannot track electronically?
No, it's a mechanical issue
Okay.
here. We have the opportunity to do that until you do it with one person. You can't really implement it across the board. While I might be able to dictate it, I'd rather get other people somewhat supportive of it. I'm doing it in the adult court because there was a unique situation there that allowed me to do it. The mountains are a problem. Mineral County, which is part of this judicial district, would not lend itself as much to that type of tracking, and the northern part of this county also would not. The company is here local, but it will generate a map and show you where that individual was for any length of time. The map can be generated in, let's say, 60 seconds. We'll show you where that individual was. You can also do it passively by having the tracking device downloaded. That's being used by the federal probation office here in Montana and Hawaii. So I'm taking my lead from the federal area, and I'm applying it in a limited situation in the adult area, and again, with some buy-in from everybody in the juvenile side, I would do that. But it can't be just because I want to be the first one on the block to have it. It has to make sense. It's not too expensive. It's about $15 a day to implement. So we have the funding to do that. But just watching where they go is oftentimes not as important as having things for them to do so they don't go there. And we've developed some good programs here as well. I want to mention, if it hasn't already been mentioned, the work that we do with Habitat for Humanity. We have juveniles up there working. Those kids then begin to really identify with the community. They are doing something tangible. They're not just picking up trash. We used it successfully last year to weed someone away from the weed and also develop a job skill, keep him on the right track, and that young person then received a local award from Habitat. So it's something that the concept of success and positive reinforcement needs to be woven into the fabric of how we deal with mental health in juveniles. There's not very much positive reinforcement currently available in this system. We've been doing some of that through our drug court and through our other community programs that Mr. Pierce supervises. So learning the impact of positive rewards to young people when they actually do one small little thing, and to their families, because those families have been beaten up for a long time with this failure, and they may have also experienced it. So giving them a chance to be proud of their young person and recognizing success is one little kernel, another little kernel that I picked up along the way.
Thank you, Judge. 28 minutes.
thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Barbara Mitzkes, and I have all sorts of associations with these particular youth. Right now, I am the academic instructor at the Teen Recovery Center, which is a residential adolescent treatment program here in Missoula. But before that, and I've worked there for about 2 years, and before that, I worked in adult education with the 16 to 18-year-olds in the GED program. And so I'm very familiar with the school issues as well as the mental health issues, as the addiction issues, and the disability issues. One of the things that I wanted to bring up and that I haven't heard here today, and I will admit that I wasn't here at the beginning because I was still at work, is how the transition between, the difficulty with keeping these kids in school in the first place, as well as their education while they're in treatment of any kind, and then transitioning them back into the community. It's very hard to get that streamlined. I'm one of those, and I think, I know that there are a lot of studies that show that, although I can't cite them, is that education is one of those things that can really help a person out of some of the other negative situations that they're in. But without this support from the education community, and, I will say that, whenever I've worked with youth court, education is one of the prime things that they insist upon, and I've always very much appreciated that, if you are not in school, then you're in trouble. Of course, it works the other way around, too. If you're in trouble, you're not in school. But mostly that's what I wanted to talk about, was this, inability, or the, not necessarily inability, but just the difficulty that there is in educating these youth. We have people at the Teen Recovery Center. Well, right now, we have a maximum of 8 residents at a time. Right now, 7 out of those 8 are court-ordered to be there. We have 1 volunteer person. Many of them have diagnosed mental health issues. They all have addiction issues. Of the ones that I have, let's see, 3, probably 4 of them who have learning disabilities as well. So I see the whole impact of everything all together. And it's, I'm one of those people, luckily, that I have hope for these kids, otherwise I wouldn't be there. But it doesn't help anything when you see that when they try to transition into school that they're really far behind, because even though they do all the work they can when they're with you, it's still not enough. And many schools don't want to send work for these kids to do while they're in treatment. And it's a hard thing to do because it has to be very alternative. And there are so many things that while they're in treatment are unsafe. Like I say, we can't do chemistry. We can't do woods. There's so many things that we can't do because they're physically unsafe. But there are lots of things that we can do if given that chance. The other thing, of course, is the funding. As you know, particularly in this area, the mental health area and the treatment area, the funding is not sufficient. At the Teen Recovery Center, that's been particularly difficult. And now we're working back on issues of safety, which is of utmost importance. And some of that also then means, lack of other options. Of other staff. So it's, let's see, I guess I'm not really sure how to finish this, but it's a difficult situation. I know that there are services all over the place, but it is that connection that we have trouble with. A few years ago when I was at Adult Education, I was the chairperson for a group called Youth Taking Flight, which was actually set up mostly through Casey Family, but it was a connection of all sorts of agencies in Missoula that were associated with youth at risk. And the idea was to, put all of these resources together and have them know about each other so that, when a particular issue came up, they would know who to talk to. Once Casey Family changed their focus, then a lot of that just kind of disappeared. I know that. But, I know that I believe these things are possible. And, these kids are worth it. And I don't think that, at least people in this room, would disagree with that. I know there are some others in different areas who might. But, it's family, it's individual, it's community. And it's a hard place to be working right now because of all the insecurity of funding, things like that. But, it's the place where some of us belong to. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'm just getting up and doing it because I was here earlier and had to leave, so I wanted to come back. But I'll be brief so anyone else can finish before the hearing is done today. I'm Dory Brownlow. I'm a deputy county attorney with the Missoula County Attorney's Office, and I'm the primary juvenile prosecutor. I do all the charging in formal court and handle most of the cases. We just have, that I deal with, the ones that go into formal court who either have serious charges or multiple charges. And there's been a lot of testimony today about kids that go into detention and certainly that we see those with serious mental health issues. Luckily, I think sometimes they get addressed once they get into detention because then they become obvious to people outside of the family and outside of their normal system. What I find a lot, and so I'll just address today, is when we're making decisions on, most of the youth never go into detention, so sometimes I think a lot of the focus does get on the kids that go into detention, but those that don't, that get put on probation, and we're coming up with terms of probation, a lot of times I feel like we don't have sufficient information to make the best recommendations. So what I would like to see is some earlier evaluations, so we're not just waiting until either a placement out of the home or a detention issue becomes necessary. But earlier on in the system, we determine whether there are mental health issues that should be addressed in the probationary terms. And I think often that doesn't happen, that we follow sort of the norm of community service, you're on probation. And really, when they do that, they're addressing what the youth has done, but so often I don't think that addresses what their actual needs are, and not necessarily then keep them out of the system. We wait too often until they're further down the system before we decide that, mental health evaluation is really necessary here. And I also think we deal with kids that run the continuum. We have those that are have serious mental health issues, but so many of them have not quite as severe, and I think those often get overlooked. But if what we're trying to do is rehabilitate, then those really shouldn't be overlooked, because I'm afraid I've done adults too in the criminal system, and I think you'll see a lot of kids who have sort of the less serious mental health issues go untreated, end up too often in the adult system. So that's basically what I want to say today. I know a lot of what I heard earlier had been covered, and when Murray started off with the policy of the purpose for the hearings and for the committee, I think is so important that we have more mental health incorporated into it. Is there anything? That's all. Thank you.
My name is Linda Carlson, and I'm a concerned community member. I'm a parent. I'm a foster parent. I'm an adoptive parent. I'm a CASA volunteer. I work in a legal-related office, and I worked in the court system for 18 years prior to what I do now. And I thought I was pretty enlightened and intelligent. Both of my children have mental health issues. And then my oldest child hit adolescence in the juvenile justice system, and boy, I didn't know very much. Her experience is recent. She's in the system right now. And I don't want to make it personal, just maybe explain some of the things I've had to deal with and where I think needs might be. I think the need for training and awareness for folks from one end of the system to the other is needed. There's a lot of caring individuals out there, but there's still a lot of work to be done. I think starting in the school system, I explained to folks year after year, my daughter has mental health issues. They were not so severe at that time, and I've still never been able to get her an IEP. And that was difficult. She'd have issues with the school, but that never seemed to get resolved. She got into more trouble, and I was encouraged over and over again to call the police, to call the police, to call the police. So I called the police. And due to my actions, she got involved deeper in the juvenile justice system. Fortunately, she had early assessments and treatment, but when she hit adolescence recently, all kinds of new issues arose. She ended up in the youth court system and ended up in detention. Most recently, I think she was in for 42 days. When she was in detention, there were a lot of caring officers out there, a lot of knowledgeable officers, and some that weren't. When more issues started to arise, and she would have nightmares, and it took 4 guards to restrain her and take her to the hospital so she could be sedated. She wasn't evaluated. She wasn't evaluated when she went in. She was evaluated a few days before she was released. She did self-harming activities in the detention center, and she wasn't evaluated. She's a victim of sexual abuse, and when on one trip into the detention center, she was strip searched. Never strip searched any other time, just when there was one particular officer. The trauma that she experienced from that was horrific for her, and then became a new issue to be addressed. I understand there's procedures, but I think more training and enlightenment would have been helpful. I like some of the recommendations and ideas that have been presented, the early assessment, the early intervention, the potential mobile crisis unit. I think all of these things would be helpful. I think funding is a big issue. Fortunately, my children receive good funding and support from the state, but not everyone has that opportunity and those resources. So I'm sure it's a very difficult issue for other folks. My other daughter has mental health issues as well. She's coming up. I'm waiting for her to hit adolescence, and I'm hoping that by having these talks and these discussions, that when the time comes, there'll be more opportunities for intervention and treatment, and people may have a different outlook so that she doesn't end up as deep in the juvenile justice system as my other daughter did and is. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Hi, my name is Craig Kruger. I'm the program director at the Shirley Miller Retention Home. It's a shelter in town. I just have a few brief things to say. It seems like a lot of people, I'll echo many of the same things that they've said. I'm not a clinician or a diagnostician, but I've worked at the Attention Home for 16 years and feel like I have a lot of practical experience working with a variety of youth in our community. The Attention Home is kids are placed at the Attention Home for a variety of reasons. Many of them are placed by the Department of Family Services because of abuse and neglect. Oftentimes they're placed through mental health and chemical dependency providers as added supports for homes that aren't able to provide the things that they need. And also by youth court, oftentimes as a detention alternative. One of the things that we really have learned over the years, even before I came to the youth homes, is that those kids really are the same kids. It's really just who's paying attention and how are they acting out some of the needs that they have. They really are suffering from the same things. At times, if they're hurting themselves, then they get involved with the mental health center. If they're hurting others, they might get involved with youth court. And oftentimes, parents are part of the situation that's existing and reacting, and they're suffering the abuse that's all part of the cycle that occurs in the family, and so they get involved with the Department of Family Services. I say that mainly as just the point that the kids that are involved in youth court and the juvenile justice system are just as worthy of the sort of supports that the other kids are getting. They're going through the same struggles. They're not bad kids who, they deserve more than being locked up, which is, a fairly simple statement, but that others have said, but I think, is really the core of the whole issue here. If they're involved in the juvenile justice system, they need more. One of the other things I think that's really significant is just from my experience over the years on what the resources that are available to youth court, at least from my perspective. It seems that, in Montana, the decision was made that access to a lot of the local services were going to be put through Medicaid, and that's how the funding went. And so some of the resources available to youth court were lost, and they were put into the system that funds mental health through Medicaid. All the group homes that work for youth homes that are affiliated with my program before were paid for from one stream, and now they're mainly paid for through Medicaid. So what happens, that means is that kids that are at the Attention Home, because they're involved with the Department of Family Services, they qualify for Medicaid, so they have access to mental health services. By definition, kids that are in the mental health and by providers, they're getting mental health services because they qualify as well. But oftentimes, youth court kids are from families that don't qualify for Medicaid. What I found along with that change in services is that youth court has lost the ability to do some of the interactions, as people have said, early on. What happens is that when kids are deeply involved in the system, then there's a decision made that they're going to be placed outside of the home, and that gives them then oftentimes access to Medicaid, which then opens up a variety of resources available to them. But what seems to be not as often, and what I see too from kids that are at the attention home, is that kids they're now further along in the path down the juvenile justice program. Oftentimes it's when home's been rolled out. I mean, it's to the point where we've tried home a number of times and they're not going back there. And kids are staying longer at the attention home because they've got to do all these evaluations and things that they've not had. But now that it's gotten so bad, the decision's made, okay, let's get them involved, let's get them evaluations, let's hook them up with services, let's try to make this work. And that's really, when they come to the attention home, it's those percentages of kids that are now they're looking at mental health services. But I do often, as people have talked about here, as parents I have conversations with people that call me, how do I get services, what do I get? And really, the way it's set up right now is that parents are encouraged, well, if your kid's struggling, the way you get services, you call youth court or call the police, have them cited. You know, they've got to get into a certain degree of trouble before people feel like there's enough reason to get them involved in the system. And it works the other way, too. Kids, I mean, for me, I have to have conversations with kids who are telling me, I don't want to go home, I'm struggling, I'm not getting my needs met at home, but the decision's made that they're going to go home, possibly with services uncertain. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So they have to walk a line between, you know, you need to be in a certain amount of trouble in order for you to get access to services, but of course run the risk of, if they go too far, then the reaction is, you know, then the other option is something like Pine Hills or Riverside, you know, a non-therapeutic program. And I don't mean to malign those programs. I think they do offer some mental health services, but it's not the community-based, you know, wraparound type services that everybody thinks is the best way to go. So, I mean, what I really see has been changing over the years is that some of those earlier intervention things, as everybody has said, the earlier interventions from evaluations to short-term stays outside of the home, or, you know, even family-based services. I mean, those things are occurring, don't get me wrong. I think youth court does provide those things, but it seems as though really their resources have been lessened, and they've had to, you know, look at just certain cases. And it seems to me that there's still more cases out there that require more of those early intervention, early assessment things, because, I mean, I don't want to repeat what everyone said, but that investment, I think, is worth it, because eventually we'll be paying the price.
I want to make sure that I've got it right. You talked about the kids in the detention homes deserve the same support as the other kids. When you were talking about the other kids, are those the kids with mental health issues, the group that we're talking about here today, or other kids in general? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot and make it.
No, I think, well, one of the things that's core to what I said is it's actually the attention home, not detention home.
Oh, okay.
So I think that's core to the piece, and so
That helps.
I'm comparing those to, like I said, the kids that are at the attention home. For me, the youth court kids, if you walked in the door and interacted with them, you couldn't say, that's a youth court kid, that's a Department of Family Services kid, and that's a kid that's here because he has chemical dependency or mental health issues. They are the same kids, and that's what I mean. Because at the attention home, we have kids that are there strictly because their parents have, you know, there's been allegations of abuse and neglect, either immediately or early on, and they're still involved with the department. And what I'm talking about is that I'm comparing them to those kids, because they do have access to mental health services. I mean, we're not talking about that here today. There's things going on. But my point is just that kids that are there at the attention home because of, because they're involved, because they're really acting out in very similar ways. It's just the way that the system has paid attention to them, who's noticed.
Okay.
That's made the difference.
Okay.
And that's important.
Appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
I see some faces that haven't said a word. Okay.
This is really brave of me because I'm not prepared. My name is Pat Llewellyn, and like Peggy and Linda, we have adopted 10 children through the foster care system. 7 of those children are between the ages right now of 16 and 21. My particular case with one of my children, I've had a child that's gone in and out of Providence, and they've been tremendous to her. Same thing as Linda, she gets out of Providence, no IEP. There's no support out there in that community for that child. She has been in the youth court system, and so far she's doing pretty well. My sons, on the other hand, entered the youth court system at an older age, 17, which was a blessing in a lot of ways. But so my 17-year-old son, 2 days after his 18th birthday, gets arrested for an act that occurred, and the youth court system was wonderful. He was on probation to them, and they came and they were able to keep him on probation. One of the things, you have a targeted population here that it's critical when these kids go into the system that they be assessed. You know, these are kids that have somehow fallen through the cracks and avoided being assessed when we've begged schools and we've begged the system to please see that these children had specific needs. You have somebody there that can say this child has to be assessed. And that didn't happen for my one son, who today we received notice that he has a bench trial on June 12th. He is in the Job Corps, which was part of his probation through the youth court, that if he went to Job Corps and completed his academic and his vocational training, that on his 20th birthday he'd no longer be on probation. He really, really felt, like Brenda said, his brain development is just not done. It's just not done. And he really, really felt that he understood that he was okay to go ahead. And because he's 18, that left us out of a lot of that loop of where we could have gone in and done a lot of the advocating for him. So he really understood it to be, he was in the office when the youth probation officer talked to the public defender and really left there believing that it was okay for him to go. His life now is probably going to be ruined, turned upside down, because he now faces, he was obviously supposed to be in court at some time, and didn't understand that, and we of course didn't understand that, and so this child will probably end up, and he's just a child, you know. There's no 18-year-old male that is grown up, I'm sorry. And in this day and age, with what our kids have been through, especially kids, like I said, you have a targeted population here that has suffered a lot, like the kids in the attention home and the kids that we have in our home have all been traumatized. And this is going to be another trauma in his life that we can't stop for him now. He's doing really well in the Job Corps, and that's because the Job Corps is full of children with mental health issues. And he's doing really well there, and would have probably been successful. And now we're looking at probably is going to end up having to be pulled out of there. So, you know, this is really, you know, a case study of a child that somebody should have stepped in at some point and listened. You know, we kept saying he needs to be evaluated. This is just not, you know, and he ended up in the adult detention facility and determined that was not a place he ever wanted to be again, and was making those steps towards. My other son is in the other Job Corps camp. He does have a high school diploma, but he's there for vocational reasons, and I think also he's fetal alcohol and went without the understanding that he had to pay those fines first. Well, he had to pay his community service first. And I tried so hard to get people to understand that he does not understand that. He's in the Job Corps on an IEP. He's very lucky. We've been able, because of the fetal alcohol, to have him on IEPs throughout his life. My other son doesn't have an IEP. they just fall through those cracks. And like I said, this is a red flag population that shouldn't be falling through the cracks. So I wasn't going to come up here, so that was all I got.
Thank you so much. Wrap up at all, or? Is there anyone else that? Did you want to say anything?
I'll wait till you're done. and I'll jump
Oh.
in. Or are you done?
Boy, I feel done. I would just like to thank all of you making my job easy. I think we heard some heart-rendering stories, some things that really make us need to think about the system. And also heard a number of issues that I think if we can find the resources, keep talking about the resources to put in place, that there is the possibility to improve the system. I think that there's certainly a lot of room for improvement, but as I think almost everyone said, there are good people out there, and it's just like any other system. There's good people and there's not so good people. And I think we need to see what the council hears in the next couple of hearings and the advice that they're able to bestow upon the governor, and then the actions of the governor. So just from my point of view, thank you very much for the information you provided.
I, too, want to begin with a thank you. And before everybody takes off and leaves, I just want to say just a couple quick things. One, I truly appreciate the level of courage in this room, and not just from the providers and the people that have spoken and given their professional opinions about what's going on and what may better change the system, but also from the parents who, in many respects, didn't have to be here. No one really did, but I really, truly appreciate their courage and their honesty in terms of discussing their situations in a public forum. That takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage, and hopefully some of the things that you're looking at in terms of change, we can help to at least address those issues and try to facilitate some of that change. And again, thanks too for the professionals that have been here. We really appreciate your traveling, taking up time out of your busy day to come and offer something that you're truly concerned about. Had people travel from some pretty significant distances to come here and to offer testimony today, and we truly appreciate that. Specifically, again, thank you, Bob Liston, for facilitating things for us. We really appreciate that. First time I've worked with Bob, and really like Bob a lot, and hope to work with him again. Joel Baird's in the back. He's the one that's flipping all the switches back there and turning the TV on and doing all those crazy things. And Joel, thanks a lot for you and for MCAT and for your support. I don't know the names of the ladies that have been interpreting tonight, but I've got a new respect for hand muscles tonight. They've been at it for quite a while, and I truly appreciate that. And again, thank you guys also. A quick thanks to the mayor for the use of the chambers here. Just in terms of the plan, we want to take this information back that we've gotten today. We're going to 2 other sites, as we said, around the state. We'll be in Billings in September, I think, and then Havre in November. We want to have this document assessed and all those good things by sometime in the latter part of this year and submit it to the governor sometime in January. This stuff is going to be accessible to you. We posted Linda's email address and phone number on the television station, but I don't know if we gave it out here. But Linda Carlson's in the back of the room. She's from the Governor's Office of Community Service. And also thank you to Linda for your work here. Linda's email address is lcarlson@mt.gov. Is that right? And her phone number is 444-2573. Is that right? Cool. I got it right. Cool. Again, thank all you guys for your participation here. I want to thank Katie Stevens, my fellow council member. Christine had to leave early. She's a legislator. She's been up for the last few days. She's dog-tired, but she still made it over to Missoula and was able to start the meeting, and she had to get back to go because she's a soprano for the Helena Symphony or something like that. So she's got a long night ahead of her. But again, thank you all, and rest assured that we're going to take this information to heart, and we're going to do our level best to get some things out of this stuff. Thanks again.